I never thought that losing myself in the middle of nowhere would lead to finding everything I had been searching for. My name is Nguyen Duc Minh, and 6 months ago I was just another Vietnamese agriculture student at the University of Bologna, struggling to find my place in a foreign country where everything felt overwhelming and unfamiliar. When my professor announced an internship opportunity at a small organic vineyard in Tuscany, I applied more out of desperation than enthusiasm. I needed to get away from the city, from the constant pressure to fit in, from the loneliness that had become my constant companion since arriving in Italy. The train ride from Bologna to the tiny station near San Gimignano felt like traveling backward in time. As the urban landscape gave way to rolling hills covered in vineyards and olive groves, I found myself relaxing for the first time in months. The beauty of the Tuscan countryside was unlike anything I had ever seen, and for the first time since leaving Vietnam, I felt a sense of peace and possibility. The vineyard owner was supposed to meet me at the station, but when I stepped off the train with my single suitcase, there was no one waiting. I stood on the platform as the train disappeared into the distance, suddenly aware of how isolated I was. My Italian was still limited, my phone had no signal, and I had no idea how to get to the farm whose name I could barely pronounce. I was starting to panic when I heard the sound of an old truck approaching. The vehicle was dusty and clearly well used, and behind the wheel was a man who looked to be in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that caught the light as he stepped out of the cab. He was wearing work clothes and boots that had obviously seen years of farm labor, but there was something elegant about the way he moved, a kind of natural grace that made me immediately self-conscious about my own awkwardness. "Min," he said, pronouncing my name carefully but correctly.
I'm Marco Rossi.
"Sorry I'm late. One of the irrigation lines broke this morning, and I had to fix it before I could leave the farm." His English was accented but fluent, and his smile was warm and apologetic in a way that immediately put me at ease. I had been expecting someone older, perhaps the owner of the vineyard himself, but Marco looked like he was only a few years older than me. "Thank you for coming to get me," I said, still feeling nervous about my own English and my complete unfamiliarity with Italian culture outside the university setting. "I hope I'm not causing too much trouble." "No trouble at all," Marco replied, taking my suitcase and loading it into the back of the truck. "We're excited to have you here. It's not often we get students from Vietnam. You'll bring a fresh perspective to our work." The drive to the vineyard took about 20 minutes through winding roads that offered spectacular views of the Tuscan landscape. Marco pointed out different farms and vineyards as we drove, explaining the history of the region and the challenges facing small organic producers in a market increasingly dominated by large commercial operations. "My family has been farming this land for 4 generations," he explained as we turned onto a narrow dirt road flanked by grapevines. "We've always done things the traditional way, but now we're trying to combine old methods with new knowledge about sustainable agriculture. That's part of why we participate in the university internship program. Students like you help us learn about techniques and perspectives from other parts of the world." As we approached the farmhouse, I was struck by the beauty and simplicity of the setting. The house itself was built of local stone and looked like it had grown organically from the landscape. Grapevines stretched in neat rows across the hillsides, and in the distance, I could see olive trees and vegetable gardens. Everything looked harmonious and purposeful, as if each element of the farm served both practical and aesthetic functions. "This is incredible," I said, genuinely amazed by the beauty of the place. "It's like something from a movie."
Marco laughed.
And I realized it was the first time I had heard genuine, unguarded laughter since arriving in Italy. "Wait until harvest season starts next month. Then you'll see if you still think it's like a movie. 12-hour days of picking grapes in the heat isn't quite as romantic as it looks in films." He showed me to a small but comfortable room in what had once been the farmhouse's servants' quarters, now converted into simple accommodations for interns and seasonal workers. The room had stone walls, a small window that looked out over the vineyards, and basic furniture that was clean and functional. After months of living in a cramped student apartment in Bologna, sharing space with other international students who were all struggling with their own challenges, this felt like luxury. "Dinner is at 7, Marco said, setting my suitcase on the bed. "Nothing fancy, we eat simply here, but we eat well." Tomorrow morning, I'll show you around the farm and explain your responsibilities. For now, get settled and rest if you need to." After he left, I sat on the bed and looked out the window at the evening light filtering through the grapevines. For the first time in months, I felt something approaching contentment. The academic pressure was gone. The social anxiety of trying to navigate Italian university culture was absent, and in its place was a sense of possibility that I hadn't experienced since leaving Vietnam. Dinner was served in the farmhouse kitchen, a large rustic room with exposed beams and a long wooden table. Marco's parents, Giovanni and Anna, welcomed me warmly despite the language barrier. My Italian was still very limited, and their English was minimal. But somehow we managed to communicate through gestures, smiles, and Marco's patient translation. The meal was simple but delicious. Fresh vegetables from the garden, pasta made by Anna that morning, wine from their own vineyard, and a sense of family warmth that I had been missing terribly since leaving home. Giovanni asked about my family in Vietnam, about my studies, about what I hoped to learn during my internship. His questions were asked through Marco's translation, but the genuine interest and kindness behind them were unmistakable. "My father wants to know if you've ever worked on a farm before," Marco translated after a rapid exchange in Italian. "A little," I replied. "My grandparents had a small rice farm, and I spent summers there when I was young. But nothing like this and nothing with grapes." When Marco translated my answer, Giovanni nodded approvingly and said something that made Marco smile. He says that rice and grapes are both crops that require patience and respect for the natural cycles. If you understand one, you can learn the other. After dinner, Marco offered to show me around the immediate area of the farm. We walked through the vineyards as the sun was setting, and he explained the different varieties of grapes they grew, the organic methods they used for pest control and soil management, and the challenges of maintaining traditional winemaking techniques in a modern market. But I found myself paying as much attention to Marco himself as to the information he was sharing. There was something captivating about his passion for the work, the way he spoke about the land and the vines as if they were living beings deserving of respect and care. He had a deep knowledge of every aspect of the farming operation, but he also had an artistic sensibility that I hadn't expected. "The wine we make here isn't just a product," he said as we paused at the top of a small hill that provided a panoramic view of the property. "It's an expression of this specific place, this particular combination of soil and climate and human care. Every bottle tells the story of the year it was made, the weather, the decisions we made, the care we put into the work." His words reminded me of something my grandfather had said about rice farming, about how each grain carried the story of the season that produced it. I had never made that connection before, but standing there in the Tuscan evening, listening to Marco talk about wine with the same reverence my grandfather had shown for rice, I felt a bridge forming between my Vietnamese heritage and this new Italian experience. The first weeks of my internship were physically demanding but deeply satisfying. Marco taught me every aspect of vineyard management, from pruning and training vines to soil testing and organic pest control. The work was often repetitive and always labor-intensive, but there was something meditative about it that I found deeply appealing. More importantly, I was learning not just about viticulture, but about a completely different approach to life and work. Marco and his family lived according to natural rhythms in ways that city life had never allowed. They woke with the sun, planned their work around weather patterns, and made decisions based on long-term sustainability rather than short-term efficiency. "Modern agriculture tries to control nature," Marco explained one morning as we worked on trellising young vines. "But traditional farming is about partnership with nature. We provide what the plants need, we protect them from serious threats, but we also respect their natural cycles and allow them to express their own character." His philosophy extended beyond farming to his entire approach to life. He worked hard during busy seasons but also knew how to rest and enjoy simple pleasures. He was deeply connected to his family and community, but he was also curious about the wider world and eager to learn from different perspectives. I found myself looking forward to our daily work sessions not just because I was learning valuable skills, but because I enjoyed Marco's company more than I had enjoyed anyone since arriving in Italy. He was patient with my limited Italian, interested in my background and experiences, and generous with his knowledge and time. But I was also becoming aware of feelings that went beyond professional mentorship or even friendship. The way Marco moved through the vineyard with such confidence and grace, the sound of his laughter when I made mistakes or asked naive questions, the way he looked when he was concentrating on complex tasks. All of this was affecting me in ways I hadn't expected and wasn't sure how to interpret. I had never been in a serious romantic relationship with anyone, male or female. Growing up in Vietnam, I had been focused primarily on academic achievement, and my family's expectations had centered around educational success rather than personal relationships. At university in Bologna, I had been too overwhelmed by language barriers and cultural differences to pursue social connections, let alone romantic ones. But the feelings I was developing for Marco were impossible to ignore or misinterpret. I was attracted to him physically, but more than that, I was drawn to his intelligence, his passion for his work, his kindness toward his family and community, his genuine interest in learning about my culture and background. The realization that I was falling in love with another man was both exhilarating and terrifying. I had always known that I wasn't particularly interested in women, but I had never had the opportunity or the courage to explore what that might mean. Now, working closely with Marco every day, I was discovering aspects of myself that I had never acknowledged or understood. The situation became more complicated as harvest season approached and we began working longer hours together. The physical intimacy of the work, helping each other with heavy lifting, working side by side in the hot sun, sharing water bottles and simple meals in the fields, created opportunities for casual contact that left me hyper-aware of Marco's presence and my own reactions to him. One particularly hot afternoon, we were working on repairing a section of irrigation line that had been damaged by wild boar. The work required crawling under the vines and digging in rocky soil, and by the time we finished, we were both filthy and exhausted. Marco suggested we cool off in a small stream that ran through the property, and without thinking about the implications, I agreed. The stream was shallow but clear and surprisingly cold, fed by springs higher in the hills. Marco stripped down to his shorts and waded in, splashing water on his face and chest to wash off the dirt and sweat from our morning's work. I followed his example, trying to act casual while being intensely aware of his proximity and the intimacy of the situation. "This is one of the best parts of working outside," Marco said, leaning back against a smooth rock and closing his eyes in the afternoon sun. Being able to cool off in the stream, to feel connected to the natural world instead of trapped inside air-conditioned buildings. I agreed, but I was finding it difficult to concentrate on his words when I was so distracted by his physical presence. The way the water beaded on his skin, the relaxed expression on his face, the unconscious confidence with which he moved through this landscape that was so completely his own. All of this was affecting me in ways that felt both wonderful and impossible. When he opened his eyes and caught me looking at him, I felt my face flush with embarrassment. But instead of the awkwardness I expected, Marco smiled with what looked like understanding and perhaps even invitation. "Min," he said quietly, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you." My heart started racing, though I had no idea what he might be about to say. "You seem different from the other students who've interned here. More serious, maybe, or more focused on really understanding the work instead of just completing the requirements. What is it you're really looking for here?" His question was thoughtful and direct, and it demanded an honest answer even though I wasn't sure I understood my own motivations well enough to articulate them. "I think I was looking for a place where I could belong," I said carefully. "In Vietnam, I always felt like I was different from my family and friends, but I couldn't figure out why. At university in Bologna, I feel like a foreigner who doesn't understand the culture or the social expectations. But here, working with you and your family, I feel like I can be myself in a way I never have before." Marco nodded as if my answer made perfect sense to him. "I understand that feeling. I spent 2 years studying agriculture in Rome, and I was miserable the entire time. Too much theory, too much competition, too much focus on individual achievement instead of community and sustainability. When I came back here, I felt like I was finally breathing again." His understanding of my experience was both comforting and encouraging. But there was something in his eyes, some quality of attention and interest, that made me wonder if he was responding to more than just my words. "Can I ask you something?" I said, surprising myself with my boldness. Of course. Do you ever feel lonely here? I mean, this is such a beautiful place, and you have your family, but do you ever wish you had someone to share it with more intimately? The question was more personal than anything I had ever asked anyone, but something about the setting and the conversation made it feel natural and necessary. Marco was quiet for a long moment, and I worried that I had overstepped some boundary or made him uncomfortable. But when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful and honest. Yes, I do feel lonely sometimes. I love this place and this work, but I also want to share it with someone who understands what it means to me. Someone who sees the beauty and the meaning in this way of living. He paused, looking directly at me with an expression that was both vulnerable and hopeful. The truth is, Min, I've never felt as comfortable with anyone as I do with you. You understand the work, you appreciate the land, and you bring a perspective that makes me see everything here with fresh eyes. These past few weeks, working with you, have been some of the happiest I can remember. His words were everything I had been hoping to hear but hadn't dared to expect. The relief and joy I felt were so intense that it took me a moment to find my voice. I feel the same way, I said quietly. More than the same way. Marco, I think I'm falling in love with you. The admission hung in the air between us, vulnerable and honest and life-changing. For a moment, neither of us moved or spoke, both of us processing the significance of what had just been acknowledged. Then Marco moved closer to me in the shallow water, reaching out to touch my face with a gentleness that made my heart race. I was hoping you might feel that way, he said softly, because I've been falling in love with you too, and I wasn't sure if I was imagining the connection between us. When he kissed me, it was tender and careful and perfect, the culmination of weeks of growing attraction and emotional intimacy. The physical contact was electric, but what moved me most was the emotional honesty of the moment, the sense that we were both choosing to be vulnerable and authentic with each other. We spent the rest of the afternoon in the stream, talking about our feelings and what they might mean for our relationship. Marco told me about his own struggles with sexuality and identity, how he had always known he was different, but had never had the opportunity or courage to explore those feelings in a small, traditional community. I shared my own confusion and uncertainty, my lack of experience with romantic relationships, and my fears about how my family in Vietnam would react if they learned about my sexuality. Marco listened with patience and understanding, offering support and reassurance without trying to minimize the complexity of my situation. We don't have to figure everything out right now, he said as the sun began to set and we reluctantly prepared to return to the farmhouse. What matters is that we're honest with each other and that we give ourselves permission to explore these feelings without judgment or pressure. His approach was exactly what I needed: patient, respectful, and focused on emotional connection rather than just physical attraction. Over the following days, we continued our regular work routine while also beginning to explore the romantic dimension of our relationship. The physical intimacy developed gradually and naturally. Marco was clearly more experienced than I was, but he was also sensitive to my nervousness and lack of experience. He took time to make sure I was comfortable with each step, checking in with me constantly, making it clear that my consent and comfort were more important than his own desires. But even more meaningful than the physical aspects of our relationship was the emotional intimacy we were building. We talked for hours about our dreams and fears, our family relationships, our views on everything from agriculture to politics to the meaning of home and belonging. You know what I love most about you? Marco said one evening as we sat on the porch of the farmhouse, sharing a bottle of wine from the previous year's harvest. You make me see this place differently. Through your eyes, I understand how special it is, how much beauty and meaning exist here that I had started to take for granted. His words touched something deep inside me, because he was expressing exactly what I felt about his presence in my life. He had helped me discover not just my sexuality but my capacity for deep connection, my ability to belong somewhere, my understanding of what it meant to feel truly at home with another person. As harvest season arrived, our relationship was tested by the intensity and stress of the work. 18-hour days of picking grapes, processing fruit, and managing fermentation left little time for private conversation or romantic intimacy. But working together during this crucial period also deepened our partnership in ways that confirmed the strength of our connection. Marco trusted me with increasing responsibility, and I found myself rising to meet challenges that would have seemed impossible when I first arrived at the farm. More importantly, we developed a kind of wordless communication that allowed us to work efficiently together even when we were too tired for extended conversation. "You're a natural at this," Marco said one evening after we had finished processing the day's harvest. "My father says you have the instincts of someone who was born to farm." The compliment meant more to me than any academic achievement I had ever earned, because it represented acceptance not just of my skills but of my place in this community and this way of life. Harvest season culminated in a celebration that brought together the extended Rossi family and neighboring farmers for a feast featuring food and wine produced entirely on local farms. I had been nervous about the event, worried about language barriers and cultural differences, but Marco's family welcomed me as if I had always been part of their community. Giovanni made a toast that Marco translated for me. He's thanking everyone for their hard work during harvest, and he's especially thanking you for bringing new energy and perspective to our farm. He says you've reminded him why this work matters. But the most meaningful moment of the evening came when Marco's grandmother, Nana Elena, approached me with a small wrapped package. Inside was a simple wooden cross that had belonged to her own grandmother, along with a note in Italian that Marco translated with obvious emotion. She says this cross has been blessed to protect farmers and their families. She's giving it to you because she considers you part of our family now, and she wants you to be safe and successful wherever your path takes you. The gesture was overwhelming in its generosity and acceptance. Here was a woman who barely spoke my language, but who had somehow recognized my significance in her grandson's life and chosen to welcome me with this symbolic gift. As the harvest celebration wound down and I prepared for my return to university in Bologna, Marco and I had to confront the question of what would happen to our relationship. The internship was officially ending, but neither of us wanted to give up what we had found together. "I don't want to go back to Bologna," I admitted as we walked through the vineyards on my last morning at the farm. "These past 3 months have been the happiest of my life. I don't want to lose this or lose you." "You don't have to lose me," Marco replied, taking my hand as we walked. "Bologna is only 2 hours away. You could come here on weekends during university breaks. And after you graduate, if you want to come back permanently, there's always a place for you here." His offer was generous and appealing, but it also raised questions about my long-term plans and obligations. I was in Italy on a student visa, with expectations from my family that I would return to Vietnam after completing my degree. The idea of staying in Italy permanently, of building a life with Marco, would require conversations and decisions that I wasn't sure I was ready for. But I also knew that what I had found with Marco and at the farm was too precious to abandon without exploring every possibility for making it work. We agreed that I would return to Bologna to complete my final year of university, while maintaining our relationship through regular visits and constant communication. It wasn't ideal, but it was a way of honoring both my educational commitments and my desire to continue building a life with Marco. The return to university life was difficult after the intensity and satisfaction of farm work. Sitting in lectures about theoretical agricultural concepts felt abstract and irrelevant after months of hands-on experience with real plants and soil and weather. Living in student housing felt cramped and artificial after the spaciousness and natural beauty of the vineyard. But the most challenging aspect of returning to Bologna was the loneliness. I had grown accustomed to sharing my daily experiences with Marco, to having someone who understood and appreciated my interests and perspectives. Returning to the social isolation of international student life felt like a step backward in my personal development. I threw myself into my studies with renewed focus, but also with a clearer sense of what I wanted to do after graduation. I began researching opportunities for continuing my education in sustainable agriculture, looking specifically for programs that would allow me to remain in Europe and eventually return to working with Marco. Our relationship survived the transition to long distance, though it required constant effort and creativity to maintain intimacy across the miles. We video called every evening, sharing details of our respective days and maintaining the emotional connection that had developed during our time together. I visited the farm every other weekend, and Marco occasionally came to Bologna to experience university life and meet my international student friends. These visits were intensely meaningful but also bittersweet reminders of what we were missing during our time apart. Spending 2 days together every other week was enough to maintain our relationship, but not enough to satisfy our desire for shared daily life and ongoing partnership. The most significant challenge came when I had to tell my family in Vietnam about my relationship with Marco. I had been avoiding the conversation for months, unsure how to explain not only that I was in love with another man, but that I was considering staying in Italy permanently. The video call with my parents was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. I tried to explain my feelings for Marco and my desire to build a life with him, but the cultural and linguistic barriers made it almost impossible to convey the depth and significance of our relationship. My parents' initial reaction was confusion and disappointment. They had invested heavily in my education with the expectation that I would return to Vietnam and contribute to our family's success. The idea that I might stay in Italy for personal reasons that they didn't understand was deeply troubling to them. "We sent you to study agriculture so you could help modernize farming in Vietnam," my father said through the computer screen. "How does staying in Italy with this Italian farmer serve that purpose?" His question was fair and important, and it forced me to articulate something I had been thinking about but hadn't fully expressed even to myself. "I think I can serve that purpose better by learning from traditional European farming methods and eventually bringing that knowledge back to Vietnam," I replied. Marco and his family have generations of experience with sustainable agriculture that could be valuable in Vietnam's changing agricultural landscape. It wasn't entirely honest. My primary motivation for staying was personal rather than professional, but it wasn't entirely false either. I had learned things during my internship that could indeed be valuable for Vietnamese agriculture, and the possibility of eventually creating connections between Italian and Vietnamese farming communities was real and appealing. My parents were skeptical but agreed to give me time to complete my degree and see how my relationship with Marco developed. It wasn't enthusiastic support, but it was enough permission to continue pursuing the path I had chosen. Meanwhile, Marco was dealing with his own family conversations about our relationship and future plans. His parents had accepted me warmly during my internship, but the prospect of their son being in a serious relationship with another man required adjustments and discussions they had never anticipated. "My father is concerned about the future of the farm," Marco told me during one of our evening calls. "He's worried that if I don't have children, there won't be anyone to continue the family business." His concern was understandable and represented one of the real challenges facing our relationship. We had talked about the possibility of adoption or other ways of having children, but those conversations were still theoretical and tentative. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him that there are many ways to ensure the farm's continuation, and that the most important thing is having people who are passionate about the work and committed to the land. I told him that you understand this place and this work better than anyone I've ever met, and that you could be part of the solution rather than part of the problem." His defense of our relationship and his vision of our future together was touching and encouraging. But I also recognized that we were both navigating complex family expectations and cultural pressures that wouldn't be resolved through a single conversation. As my final semester of university progressed, I began preparing a thesis project that would allow me to combine my academic work with my practical experience at Marco's farm. The research focused on comparing traditional European organic farming techniques with traditional Vietnamese agricultural methods, looking for opportunities for cross-cultural learning and knowledge exchange. The project provided a framework for what I hoped would become my post-graduation work, developing agricultural exchange programs that would allow farmers from different cultures to learn from each other while maintaining their distinct traditions and approaches. Marco was enthusiastic about the project and offered to help with data collection and analysis. Working together on academic research added a new dimension to our relationship, demonstrating that we could collaborate intellectually as well as romantically and practically. "This could be the beginning of something really important," Marco said as we reviewed preliminary findings from my research. "Not just for us personally, but for the farming communities in both our countries. You're identifying connections and opportunities that no one has explored before." His encouragement meant everything to me, but it also added pressure to make sure the project was successful enough to justify my continued presence in Italy. I needed to demonstrate not just to my family but to immigration authorities that my relationship with Marco was part of a larger professional and cultural mission rather than simply a personal choice. The thesis defense went better than I had hoped. The committee was impressed with the practical applications of my research and the potential for developing ongoing partnerships between Italian and Vietnamese agricultural institutions. Several professors expressed interest in helping me develop the work into a more comprehensive program that could attract funding and institutional support. More importantly, the success of the project provided a legitimate professional foundation for my request to remain in Italy after graduation. I applied for a research visa that would allow me to continue developing agricultural exchange programs while maintaining my relationship with Marco and my connection to his family's farm. The visa application process was stressful and uncertain, but it was also clarifying in terms of my priorities and commitments. I realized that I was willing to navigate any amount of bureaucratic complexity to remain close to Marco and continue building the life we had started together. While waiting for visa approval, I spent increasing amounts of time at the farm, helping with spring planting and maintenance work while developing the practical components of my research project. Marco and I fell back into the easy partnership that had characterized our early relationship, but with a deeper understanding of each other and a clearer vision of our shared future. "Do you ever regret leaving Vietnam?" Marco asked one evening as we worked together in the vegetable garden behind the farmhouse. I considered his question carefully, because it touched on one of my ongoing internal conflicts. I missed my family and my cultural heritage, and there were aspects of Vietnamese life that I would always long for. But I also felt more authentically myself in Italy than I had ever felt anywhere else. "I miss Vietnam," I said finally, "but I don't regret coming here. I feel like I needed to leave in order to discover who I really am and what kind of life I want to build. Maybe someday I'll be ready to return to Vietnam. But for now, this feels like where I belong." Marco's smile in response to my answer was worth all the uncertainty and complexity of the immigration process. 6 months after my graduation, I received approval for a research visa that would allow me to remain in Italy for 3 years while developing agricultural exchange programs. The approval came with an offer of affiliation with the University of Florence's Agriculture Department and potential funding for pilot programs connecting Italian and Vietnamese farming communities. The news was everything I had been hoping for, but it also felt overwhelming in its implications. I was officially committed to building a life in Italy, to developing a career that bridged my Vietnamese heritage with my adopted Italian home, to maintaining a relationship with Marco that was becoming increasingly serious and permanent. That evening, Marco suggested we celebrate with a picnic in the vineyard, where we had first acknowledged our feelings for each other. He had prepared a meal featuring produce from the farm and wine from the previous year's harvest, and we spread a blanket among the grapevines as the sun was setting. "I have something I want to ask you," Marco said as we finished eating, his voice unusually serious. I felt my heart rate increase, sensing that this was a significant moment even though I wasn't sure what he was about to say. "These past 2 years, building a relationship with you, have been the best of my life," he continued. "You've made me a better farmer, a better person, and a better partner than I ever thought I could be. I can't imagine my future without you in it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box that had obviously been handcrafted. "This isn't a traditional engagement ring," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple silver band with a small inscription. "But I wanted to give you something that represents my commitment to you and to the life we're building together." I looked at the ring, then at Marco's face, seeing hope and vulnerability and love in his expression. "The inscription is from a poem by Cesare Pavese," he explained. "It says, 'This is the place where I want to grow old with you.'" The words and the gesture were perfect, capturing exactly what our relationship meant and what we were choosing to build together. I felt tears in my eyes as I reached for the ring and slipped it onto my finger. "Yes," I said, though he hadn't asked a specific question. "Yes to all of it. To you, to this place, to whatever future we create together." When we kissed, surrounded by the vines and the setting sun, I felt a sense of completion and beginning that I had never experienced before. We were choosing each other and choosing this life in the most intentional and meaningful way possible. As I write this now, 3 years after that first day when I stepped off the train at the tiny station near San Gimignano, Marco and I are preparing for our wedding. The ceremony will be held at the farm, with guests including both our families, international students and researchers from the agricultural exchange programs we've developed, and farming families from throughout Tuscany who have become part of our extended community. The agricultural exchange work has exceeded all our expectations, with successful pilot programs that have brought Vietnamese farmers to Italy and Italian farmers to Vietnam. The cross-cultural learning has been extraordinary, with techniques and perspectives flowing in both directions and creating innovations that benefit both agricultural communities. But the professional success, while gratifying, feels secondary to the personal fulfillment of the life Marco and I have built together. We've learned to navigate the challenges of intercultural relationships not by minimizing our differences but by treating them as opportunities for growth and understanding. We've developed ways of honoring both of our cultural backgrounds while creating new traditions that belong uniquely to us. Our daily routines reflect this cultural fusion. We start each morning with Vietnamese coffee that I prepare using beans my family sends from home, but we drink it while planning the day's work in Italian. We grow both European and Asian vegetables in our expanded garden, creating fusion dishes that honor both culinary traditions. We speak to each other in a mixture of Italian, English, and the Vietnamese phrases that Marco has learned over the years. The most meaningful aspect of our relationship is the way we've learned to create home together. When I first arrived in Italy, I felt displaced and foreign, unsure where I belonged or how to build meaningful connections. But with Marco, I've discovered that home isn't just a place you come from. It's something you create with people you love, in spaces that reflect your shared values and dreams. Tonight, as I finish writing this story, Marco is in the kitchen preparing dinner while I work at the desk we share in what was once his childhood bedroom. Through the window, I can see the vineyards where we first fell in love, and in the distance, the lights of other farmhouses where families are sharing their own evening meals. The harvest will begin next week, and we'll spend the following months processing this year's grapes into wine that will tell the story of this particular season. This specific combination of weather and care and hope. It's work that connects us to the land, to Marco's family traditions, and to the natural cycles that govern agricultural life. But it's also work that we do together, as partners who have chosen to build something beautiful and lasting despite all the obstacles and uncertainties that could have kept us apart. Every bottle of wine we produce is a testament not just to the quality of our grapes, but to the power of love to create something greater than either of us could have achieved alone. The future feels full of possibility. There are more exchange programs to develop, more connections to build between Italian and Vietnamese agricultural communities, more ways to use our relationship as an example of what's possible when people approach cultural differences with curiosity and respect rather than fear and judgment. But whatever challenges and adventures lie ahead, I know we'll face them together, with the same patience and dedication that we bring to tending the vines that first brought us together. We've learned that the best things in life, like the best wines, require time and care and willingness to trust in processes that can't be rushed or controlled. The land that once felt foreign to me now feels like home in the deepest sense. The man who was once just my patient teacher has become my partner in every aspect of life. The student who arrived lost and uncertain has become someone who knows exactly where he belongs and with whom he wants to build a future. Tomorrow, Marco and I will wake before dawn to begin another day of work in the vineyard that brought us together. We'll tend the vines that represent not just our livelihood but our commitment to nurturing things that grow slowly and last for generations. And we'll continue building a love story that began with agricultural curiosity and has grown into something as rich and complex as the finest wine. Something that improves with time and brings joy to everyone who experiences it. The farm that gave me my first sense of belonging continues to be the foundation of everything meaningful in my life. The love that began in uncertainty and wonder has become the most certain and wonderful thing I know. The future that once seemed impossible to imagine now feels inevitable and perfect, rooted in the soil of trust and nurtured by the daily choice to choose each other over and over again. Our wedding day arrived with the golden light of early autumn, when the vineyards were heavy with fruit ready for harvest, and the Tuscan countryside displayed its most spectacular colors. We had chosen this timing deliberately, wanting to celebrate our union during the season that had brought us together and that continued to define the rhythm of our shared life. The ceremony took place in the oldest section of the vineyard, among grapevines that Marco's great-grandfather had planted nearly a century ago. We had created an altar using stones from the farm's original walls, decorated with flowers from Anna's garden and branches heavy with grapes that represented the fertility and abundance we hoped for in our marriage. My parents had flown in from Vietnam for the wedding, their first trip outside of Asia and their first extended stay with Marco's family. The weeks leading up to their arrival had been filled with nervous preparation as we worked to bridge language barriers and cultural differences that seemed insurmountable in the abstract but proved manageable in the context of shared celebration and goodwill. The breakthrough in their relationship with Marco came during a cooking session where my mother taught Anna how to prepare traditional Vietnamese spring rolls, while Anna shared her recipe for handmade pasta. Despite having no common language, the two women found ways to communicate through gestures, tastes, and the universal language of hospitality and care. "Your mother has good hands for cooking," Anna told me later, her compliment translated by Marco. "She understands that food is about love, not just technique. I can see where you learned to appreciate good ingredients and careful preparation." The wedding ceremony itself was conducted in 3 languages: Italian for Marco's family and the local community, English for our international friends and colleagues, and Vietnamese for my parents and the few Vietnamese students who had become part of our extended network. Our vows were personal and specific, referencing the vineyard where we met, the seasonal cycles that governed our work, and our commitment to nurturing both the land and our relationship with the same patience and dedication. But the most meaningful moment came when Giovanni, Marco's father, presented us with a bottle of wine from the harvest that had taken place during my first internship at the farm. He had been aging it specifically for this occasion, and as he opened it for our wedding toast, he spoke about how that vintage represented not just a particular year's weather and conditions but the beginning of our love story. "This wine carries the memory of the season when our family grew to include Min," he said, his words translated for my parents and our international guests. "Every sip reminds us that the best things in life come from patience, care, and the willingness to tend something precious over time." The reception extended late into the evening, with multiple generations of both families sharing stories, music, and dances from their respective cultures. I watched my elderly Vietnamese grandmother attempt to learn traditional Italian folk dances while Marco's teenage cousins tried to master basic Vietnamese phrases, and I felt overwhelmed by gratitude for the community of support and acceptance we had created around our relationship. One of the most touching moments came when Dr. Chun, my former thesis advisor who had helped me develop the agricultural exchange programs, presented us with a wedding gift that represented the professional dimension of our partnership. It was a beautifully bound book containing documentation of all the exchanges we had facilitated between Italian and Vietnamese farmers, including photographs, testimonials, and technical reports that demonstrated the impact of our work. "You have shown that love and professional collaboration can enhance each other," he said in his presentation. "Your relationship has created opportunities for cultural and agricultural exchange that benefit farming communities in both your countries. This book is evidence that personal authenticity and professional success are not competing values but complementary aspects of a life well lived." The gift was meaningful not just as recognition of our work but as validation of the path we had chosen to build our careers around our relationship rather than despite it. We had proven to ourselves and our communities that it was possible to integrate personal and professional goals in ways that strengthened both. Our honeymoon was spent traveling through Vietnam, where Marco met my extended family and experienced the agricultural traditions that had shaped my early understanding of farming and community. The trip was both wonderful and challenging, as Marco navigated culture shock while I rediscovered my homeland through his eyes. The most significant part of the trip was our visit to my grandparents' rice farm, where I had spent childhood summers learning to appreciate the rhythms of agricultural life. My grandfather, now in his 80s, had been curious but skeptical about my decision to marry a foreign man and remain abroad. But spending time with Marco in the rice fields created a connection that transcended language and cultural barriers. "He understands the land," my grandfather told me in Vietnamese after watching Marco work alongside him for several days. "He has the hands and the heart of a real farmer. I can see why you chose him." Marco, meanwhile, was fascinated by the techniques and traditions of rice cultivation, finding parallels and contrasts with his own viticultural background that enriched his understanding of global agriculture. He took extensive notes and photographs, already envisioning ways that Vietnamese water management techniques might be adapted for Italian vineyard irrigation. "There's so much wisdom here," he told me one evening as we sat by the irrigation canals that my grandfather had helped design decades earlier. "Methods that have been refined over centuries, approaches to working with water, and whether that could revolutionize how we think about sustainable farming in Europe." His genuine appreciation for Vietnamese agricultural traditions was deeply meaningful to my family, demonstrating that his love for me extended to respect for the culture and knowledge that had shaped me. By the end of our visit, he had been informally adopted by my extended family, with aunts and uncles teaching him Vietnamese cooking techniques and farming methods with the same generosity they had always shown to family members. Returning to Italy after the honeymoon, we settled into married life with the satisfaction of having successfully integrated our backgrounds and families while maintaining our individual identities and professional goals. The agricultural exchange programs continued to expand, with funding from both Italian and Vietnamese government agencies and interest from farming communities throughout Southeast Asia and Europe. One of our most successful initiatives was a long-term residency program that brought young Vietnamese farmers to Tuscany for 6-month internships, while sending Italian agricultural students to Vietnam for similar immersive experiences. The program had grown to include partnerships with universities, government agencies, and private farming operations in both countries. Marco and I served as coordinators and mentors for the program, drawing on our own experience of cross-cultural relationship building to help participants navigate the challenges of living and working in unfamiliar environments. Many of the relationships formed through the program extended far beyond the official exchange period, creating lasting friendships and professional collaborations. "You're not just teaching farming techniques," one Vietnamese participant told us at the end of his internship. "You're showing us that it's possible to honor our heritage while learning from other traditions, to be proud of where we come from while remaining open to growth and change." His observation captured something essential about what we were trying to achieve through the exchange programs. We weren't encouraging participants to abandon their cultural identities or adopt foreign practices wholesale, but to find ways of integrating different approaches that enhance their effectiveness while maintaining their authenticity. As our marriage entered its second year, we began discussing the possibility of starting a family. The conversation was complex because it involved not just our personal desires but questions about adoption procedures, the legal status of same-sex parenting in Italy, and the practical challenges of raising children while maintaining our international work commitments. We decided to explore adoption options, specifically focusing on children from Vietnam who might benefit from growing up in a bicultural household with connections to both Italian and Vietnamese communities. The process was lengthy and bureaucratic, requiring extensive documentation, home studies, and interviews with social workers and adoption agencies. But it was also deeply meaningful, forcing us to articulate our values, our vision for family life, and our commitment to providing stable, loving homes for children who needed them. The preparation process strengthened our relationship and clarified our priorities in ways that felt important regardless of the ultimate outcome. While navigating the adoption process, we also expanded our involvement in local community organizations, particularly those focused on supporting immigrant families and promoting cultural exchange. Marco joined the board of a regional organization that provided services to foreign agricultural workers, while I began teaching Italian language classes for Vietnamese immigrants in the nearby city of Siena. This community work brought us into contact with other multicultural families and individuals who were navigating similar challenges of identity, belonging, and cultural integration. We found ourselves serving as informal mentors and advocates, sharing our experience while learning from others who were creating their own versions of cross-cultural success. One of the most rewarding aspects of this work was witnessing the impact of representation and visibility on young people from immigrant families. Several Vietnamese Italian teenagers began visiting our farm regularly, drawn by the novelty of meeting successful adults who shared their bicultural experience. "I never saw anyone like us before," one young man told us during a harvest season visit. "My parents want me to be successful in Italy, but they also want me to remember Vietnamese culture. I didn't know it was possible to do both until I met you and Marco." His words reminded us that our relationship had significance beyond our personal happiness. We were demonstrating possibilities for other young people who were trying to navigate multiple cultural identities while building authentic, successful lives. 3 years into our marriage, we received the news that our adoption application had been approved, and we were matched with a 7-year-old Vietnamese boy named Duc whose parents had died in a motorbike accident, leaving him in the care of overwhelmed relatives who were unable to provide the resources he needed for education and stability. The news was overwhelming in its joy and responsibility. We were going to become parents to a child who shared my cultural background but who would need extensive support in adapting to life in Italy. The transition would require all of our patience, creativity, and love, but it would also complete our family in ways we had been dreaming about for years. Preparing for Duke's arrival required months of planning and preparation. We converted Marco's old childhood room into a space that would be welcoming and comfortable for a young Vietnamese boy, incorporating elements of both cultures while ensuring that he would have privacy and space to adjust to his new environment. We also began intensive preparation in Vietnamese language and culture, with Marco working to improve his conversational skills while I researched resources for maintaining Duke's connection to his heritage while integrating him into Italian society. The challenge was significant, but we approached it with the same collaborative spirit that had characterized our relationship from the beginning. When Duc arrived at the farm on a crisp October morning, accompanied by social workers and translators, he was obviously overwhelmed and frightened by the magnitude of change in his life. He was a small, serious boy with intelligent eyes and a wariness that spoke of loss and uncertainty about what his future might hold. The first weeks were challenging for all of us. Duc spoke very little Italian, struggled with the rural setting after growing up in Ho Chi Minh City, and was clearly grieving the loss of his parents and the familiar world he had left behind. Marco and I took turns staying home with him, helping him adjust to our routines while being patient with his emotional needs and cultural confusion. The breakthrough came during harvest season, when Duc expressed curiosity about the work that defined so much of our daily life. Despite his urban background, he had an intuitive understanding of plants and growing things, and he took naturally to the careful, methodical work of grape picking and processing. "He has good hands for this work," Giovanni observed after watching Duc spend an afternoon learning to select ripe fruit. "And he pays attention to details. These are signs of someone who could become a real farmer if he chooses." More importantly, working alongside us in the vineyard gave Duc opportunities to observe and participate in our family dynamics without the pressure of formal conversation or cultural explanation. He could see that Marco and I worked as a team, that we respected each other's knowledge and contributions, and that the farm was a place where careful attention and honest effort were valued regardless of background or experience. Gradually, Duc began to open up about his own experiences and feelings. In conversations that mixed Vietnamese, Italian, and English, he told us about his parents, his memories of Vietnam, his fears about fitting into Italian society, and his confusion about having two fathers instead of the traditional family structure he had known. "Will other children make fun of me for having two dads?" he asked one evening as we helped him with homework that required him to draw a picture of his family. The question was heartbreaking in its vulnerability, but it also provided an opportunity for honest conversation about the challenges and rewards of being different from conventional expectations. "Some people might not understand our family," I told him carefully, "but the people who matter, the people who become your real friends, will see that you are loved and cared for, and that's what's most important." Marco added his own perspective. "There are many different kinds of families, Duc. What makes a family good is not how it looks from the outside, but how the people in it treat each other. Do you feel safe and loved here?" Duke's nod in response was small but definite, and it represented a crucial step in his integration into our family and his acceptance of the new life we were building together. The process of becoming a family of 3 required adjustments and compromises from all of us. Marco and I had to learn to balance our relationship dynamics with the demands of parenting, while Duc had to adjust to rural Italian life while maintaining his Vietnamese identity and processing his grief and trauma. But we also discovered unexpected joys and satisfactions in family life. Duke's presence brought new energy and perspective to the farm, and his questions about everything from grape varieties to local customs helped Marco and me see our environment through fresh eyes. His eagerness to learn and his resilience in facing change were inspiring and humbling. 6 months after Duke's arrival, we enrolled him in the local elementary school, where he would need to navigate Italian academic expectations while continuing to develop his language skills and cultural understanding. The transition was stressful for all of us, but it was also necessary for his long-term integration and success. The school community's response to our family was generally positive, though we did encounter some questions and occasional awkwardness from parents who were unfamiliar with same-sex parenting or international adoption. We approached these situations with patience and transparency, recognizing that education and visibility were the best ways to build acceptance and understanding. Duke's academic progress was remarkable, demonstrating both intellectual capability and determination to succeed in his new environment. But more importantly, he began forming friendships with classmates who appreciated his unique perspective and were curious about his Vietnamese heritage rather than critical of his family structure. One of the most meaningful developments was Duke's decision to teach some of his Italian friends basic Vietnamese phrases and to share stories about Vietnamese culture and traditions. Watching him take pride in his heritage while successfully integrating into Italian society felt like confirmation that our approach to multicultural parenting was working. "I'm Vietnamese and Italian," he announced one day, with the matter-of-fact confidence that children bring to complex identity questions. "And I have 2 dads who love me and teach me about farming and cooking and being a good person." His self-description captured exactly what we had hoped to achieve: a sense of integrated identity that honored all aspects of his background while embracing the new family and cultural context he was joining. As Duke settled into our family life, Marco and I were able to return more attention to our professional work, though always with the understanding that family responsibilities took precedence over career ambitions. The agricultural exchange programs continued to thrive, with new partnerships and funding sources that allowed us to expand our reach and impact. One of our most ambitious projects was the development of a research center that would bring together farmers, academics, and policymakers from throughout the Mediterranean region and Southeast Asia to study climate adaptation strategies and sustainable agriculture techniques. The center would be based at our farm, utilizing the land and facilities that had been in Marco's family for generations while incorporating modern research capabilities and international collaboration. The project represented the culmination of everything we had learned about cross-cultural agriculture and the intersection of traditional knowledge with contemporary challenges. It would also provide opportunities for Duke to grow up in an environment where international collaboration and cultural exchange were normal parts of daily life. "This is exactly what we dreamed of when we first started the exchange programs," Marco said as we reviewed architectural plans for the research center's facilities. "A place where knowledge and friendship can develop together, where people from different backgrounds can learn from each other while working toward common goals." The research center opened 2 years later, with inaugural programs that brought together participants from 12 countries to study drought-resistant farming techniques, organic pest management, and community-supported agriculture models. The diversity of perspectives and approaches created an incredibly rich learning environment that exceeded all our expectations. But the most meaningful aspect of the center's success was watching Duke interact with the international participants. Now 10 years old and fully bilingual in Italian and Vietnamese, with conversational skills in English, he served as an unofficial ambassador for the program, helping visitors feel welcome while demonstrating the possibilities of multicultural competence and confidence. "He's going to be an incredible global citizen," one participant from Thailand observed. "He understands from personal experience that different cultures have valuable contributions to make, and he's comfortable moving between different worlds in ways that most adults never achieve." Her observation was gratifying because it suggested that our approach to parenting was producing exactly the kind of person we hoped Duke would become: someone who could honor his Vietnamese heritage while thriving in Italian society, who could appreciate cultural differences while building bridges between communities, who could maintain strong family bonds while developing independent identity and goals. As our family entered its 5th year together, we faced new challenges and opportunities that tested our resilience and adaptability. Duke was approaching adolescence, with all the complexity that transition would bring to questions of identity, belonging, and future planning. The research center was succeeding beyond our expectations, creating opportunities for expansion, but also demanding increased time and administrative responsibility. Most significantly, we received an offer that would change the trajectory of our lives in fundamental ways. The Vietnamese government, impressed by the success of our agricultural exchange programs and research initiatives, invited us to establish a permanent satellite program in Vietnam that would facilitate ongoing collaboration between Vietnamese and European farming communities. The opportunity was extraordinary but also daunting. It would mean spending several months each year in Vietnam, managing programs from both countries, and navigating the complexities of international development work. For Duc, it would mean reconnecting with his birth country in ways that could be either healing or traumatic, depending on how successfully we manage the transition. What do you think about spending time in Vietnam? I asked Duc one evening as we discussed the possibility as a family. His response was thoughtful and mature. I want to learn more about where I came from, and I want to help other kids who might be in situations like I was. But I also want to make sure this will always be my home too. His answer captured exactly the kind of balanced perspective we hoped he would develop about his multicultural identity. He was curious about his Vietnamese heritage without rejecting his Italian home, interested in contributing to his birth country's development without abandoning the family and community that had nurtured him. After extensive family discussions and careful consideration of the practical implications, we decided to accept the Vietnamese government's offer. The decision felt like a natural evolution of everything we had been building together. Our relationship, our family, our professional work, and our commitment to using our unique combination of backgrounds and experiences to benefit both the communities we served. The transition to regular travel between Italy and Vietnam required significant adjustments to our family routines and professional responsibilities. We developed systems that allowed us to maintain the research center's operations in Tuscany while establishing new programs in Vietnam, often splitting our time between countries or traveling together as a family when circumstances permitted. For Duc, the regular visits to Vietnam were transformative experiences that deepened his understanding of his heritage while reinforcing his appreciation for the life we had built together in Italy. He met relatives he had been too young to remember, visited the places where his parents had lived and worked, and began to develop a more complete sense of his personal history and cultural identity. I understand now why you and Papa fell in love with both places, he told me during one of our Vietnam trips. Vietnam has this energy and history that makes me proud to be Vietnamese. But Italy has the peace and beauty that makes me want to build something lasting. I want to be part of both worlds. His words reflected exactly the kind of integrated cultural identity that Marco and I had hoped to model and nurture. He wasn't choosing between his Vietnamese and Italian identities, but finding ways to honor and contribute to both. The Vietnamese programs were challenging but incredibly rewarding, bringing together farmers and researchers from throughout the Mekong Delta region to study water management, crop diversification, and sustainable intensification techniques. Many of the participants were smallholder farmers who had never had opportunities to interact with international experts or to share their own knowledge with global audiences. You are showing us that our traditional methods have value in the modern world, one elderly farmer told us through a translator. For years, we were told that old ways were backward, that we needed to abandon everything and adopt industrial techniques. But you help us see that traditional knowledge and new science can work together. His observation captured something essential about our approach to agricultural development work. We weren't trying to impose European or American methods on Vietnamese farmers, but to facilitate exchanges that honored local knowledge while introducing new possibilities and techniques. Meanwhile, Marco was developing his own deep appreciation for Vietnamese culture and agricultural traditions. His initial culture shock during our honeymoon had evolved into genuine expertise in Vietnamese farming methods, and he was beginning to identify ways that Vietnamese techniques could benefit Italian agriculture as well. The water management systems here are incredibly sophisticated, he told me after spending a day with rice farmers in the Mekong Delta. Some of these irrigation techniques could revolutionize how we think about vineyard water conservation during drought periods. His enthusiasm for cross-cultural learning remained as strong as it had been during our early relationship, but now it was informed by years of experience and backed by scientific methodology and institutional support. As I write this now, 8 years after that first day when I arrived at the tiny train station near San Gimignano, our family and our work continue to evolve in ways that challenge and fulfill us. Duck is now 14, fluent in 3 languages, and beginning to articulate his own vision for how he wants to contribute to the world. The research center has become a model for international agricultural collaboration, with sister programs in 6 countries and recognition from global development organizations. Marco and I have learned to navigate the complexities of marriage, parenting, and professional partnership while maintaining the love and respect that brought us together. We've discovered that the key to sustained relationship success is the same as the key to successful farming: attention to daily details, patience with natural processes, and commitment to nurturing growth even when progress seems slow or uncertain. Our latest project involves developing a comprehensive educational curriculum that would teach young people from rural communities in both Vietnam and Italy about sustainable agriculture, cultural exchange, and global citizenship. The program would combine practical farming skills with language learning, cultural studies, and leadership development, preparing participants to become bridges between their home communities and the wider world. We're not just teaching farming, Marco explained to a group of potential funders. We're teaching young people to see agriculture as a way of connecting communities, preserving cultures, and addressing global challenges like climate change and food security. The program represents everything we've learned about the intersection of personal relationships and professional mission, about the power of love to create opportunities for broader positive impact, about the importance of raising young people who can navigate multiple cultures while remaining rooted in their own values and identities. Tonight, as I finish writing this story, Marco is helping Duc with a school project about family immigration stories, while I prepare for a video conference with Vietnamese partners about next year's research initiatives. Through the kitchen window, I can see the vineyards where Marco and I first acknowledged our love for each other, now lit by the full moon that has witnessed 9 harvests since that transformative conversation by the stream. The landscape looks the same as it did when I first arrived here as a confused and lonely student, but everything else has changed in ways I could never have anticipated. The foreign country that once felt overwhelming has become home in the deepest sense. The man who was once my patient teacher has become my partner in every aspect of life. The boy who joined our family as a traumatized orphan has become a confident, compassionate young person who serves as living proof that love can transcend any boundary. Our story began with agricultural curiosity and cultural displacement, but it has grown into something much larger. A demonstration that authentic love can serve as the foundation for meaningful work, that family bonds can be created through choice and commitment as well as biology, and that the courage to embrace difference can lead to discoveries and opportunities that benefit entire communities. The future continues to unfold with possibilities we can't yet imagine. There are more young people to mentor, more programs to develop, more ways to use our unique combination of backgrounds and experiences to build bridges between communities and cultures. But whatever challenges and adventures lie ahead, I know we'll face them together, with the same love and determination that has sustained us through every previous chapter of our journey. The farm that gave me my first sense of belonging remains the center of everything meaningful in our lives. The love that began in uncertainty and wonder has become the most reliable and nourishing force we know. The family we've created together continues to grow and change, adapting to new circumstances while maintaining the values and connections that define who we are at our core. Tomorrow, Marco, Duc, and I will wake before dawn to begin another day of work that combines ancient agricultural wisdom with contemporary scientific knowledge, personal fulfillment with community service, local rootedness with global awareness. We'll tend the vines that represent not just our livelihood but our commitment to nurturing growth and creating beauty that will outlast our own lives. And we'll continue building a legacy that honors both the traditions that shaped us and the new possibilities we're creating together. One season at a time, one harvest at a time, one day of choosing love over fear at a time.